Welcome everybody to this very unusual session of EJCC Live, because our usual interviewer, David Ian Neville, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you, we're turning the tables on him tonight. And Colin Grant, who is an author and journalist who has also featured on EJCC Live before, is going to interview David instead of the usual. So, as I say, as many of you will know, David is a writer and director, and Colin is going to ask him more about his life and his work.
I would like to begin with a short description of David's wonderful career. And I've taken this from the website of the Scottish Books Trust. And it says, David Ian Neville works as a writer, director and producer. He has written for theatre, TV and radio. Theatre plays include dramatisations of Joan Lingard's novels Twelfth Day of July and Across the Barricades. The Fringe First Award-winning play Exile, A Deafening Silence, The Heart of the City and Doe. Radio plays include Desperate Measures and Inside, which was on BBC Radio 4. Television work includes storylines for Linda LaPlante's TV series The Governor, the award-winning TV plays Martha and The Audition for STV, and scripts for BBC and STV schools programmes. He has performed one-man shows for young people, including The Book Safari and The Life and Times of RLS. He's an experienced theatre director and has produced a wide variety of dramas for BBC Radio, including Behind Closed Doors, 44 Scotland Street, The Archers, and Shuttle Diplomacy for Radio 4. Black Watch and 3-5 Silly Twerp for Radio 3, Linton Bay and King of Hearts for Radio Scotland, and Station Road for Radio Wales. Now, that's a highly impressive CV, David, but I noticed that, and again, you were introduced like that, I noticed that it lists you as David Ian Neville, as opposed to just plain old David Neville, which was the name you used throughout your childhood and teens and as a young adult. So what led to that change of name, and how did that impact on you?
Well, what happened when I joined Equity, the Actors Union, you weren't allowed to have the same name as another member, an existing member. And so originally my name was going to be David Neville. And they said I couldn't use that because there was another David Neville. So I used my middle name and called myself Ian Neville. As actors do, any opportunity to send out your CV and look for work that you take. And so I redid my CV and sent this out as Ian Neville. Meanwhile, I got some writing work as well. And for my writing work, I was calling myself David Ian Neville. Anyway, a few weeks later, Equity phoned me up and they said, you can now use your original name for some reason. And I said, well, just to make sure I don't clash with the other David Neville, I'll call myself David Ian Neville, which sounds very grand, but there you go.
And what was this other David Neville? Who was he? I mean, was he quite a famous actor at that time?
Well, he was, I think, quite a bit older than me. And the reason why Equity got back in touch with me was, for some reason, I don't know, maybe he'd stopped being a member for a couple of weeks, so there was an administrative thing. But he certainly continued being an Equity member. So to avoid any confusion, I thought I'll use my double-barreled name. And a funny thing happened. I'll tell you about this, Colin. Some years later, a famous Glasgow paper, not the one that you used to edit, the Evening Times published a story about how a young Glasgow actor called David Neville was in Fawlty Towers. I wish. And in fact, it was the other David Neville. And I had to let the Evening Times know that they might have made a little mistake.
That's a shame.
That's a big shame.
So when you initially left drama school in Edinburgh, you wanted to be an actor and you auditioned for a part in the very first or pilot episode of Take the High Road. And although you weren't successful, you made a good impression, and you made some good contacts, and they helped propel you to the great success that you've enjoyed in a slightly different trajectory. So how did that come about?
Well, actually, when I left drama college, I didn't just want to be an actor. I wanted to write and direct and perform as well. And at that time, it was people were usually one thing or another. So it wasn't always welcomed that you were more than one thing. Now it's much more accepted. So I was trying to do a bit of everything, and in fact, I was lucky. I got an audition, several auditions for the pilot of Take the High Road, which was then called High Road, Low Road. And when I got to the third audition, after reading for the part, the executive producer, a man called Brian Izzard, said, tell me about your life. Tell me about your work. What do you do? I was just a very young guy at the time. And so I said, well, I've run this sort of small scale theatre company, and we tour and we do shows for kids and for families. And I write and direct the shows as well as perform in them. And he suddenly said, you're a writer. And I said, well, yeah, I've written a few things. And he said, well, writers can come and see me at any time. Actors need to make an appointment. And he said, send me some scripts. And so when I went out from the audition, I said to the casting director, who had met a few times now, I said, is he serious? And she said, rather, yeah, he really means it. So you must send him some scripts. And so I sent him a couple of scripts, and he wrote back and he said, well, they're not quite what I was looking for, but I've got a new producer coming in to produce a series of plays by new writers, and I want you to meet this person. And that's what happened. I met Robert Love, who was setting up a series called Preview, a series of 6 plays by 6 new writers. And after submitting quite a few ideas to Robert, he commissioned my first television play, which was called Martha.
Yeah. Can you tell us a wee bit about Martha? And also, I was curious to know this. I'm not sure we discussed this. Was it based on a real person?
No, it wasn't based on a real person. Martha was about a lady who gets put into a old people's home by her son. She's in a wheelchair, and he thinks that she's not able to fully look after herself anymore. She's maybe had a couple of falls, but she's a very spirited lady, and she feels that she shouldn't be in a home. But she thinks it's going to be a nice home. And this was sort of inspired by my grandmother. I only knew one of my grandparents because the others had passed away before I was born. And when my grandmother was very ill, and, in the last few weeks of her life, I began to wonder what her whole life was like. The only thing I knew about her was that her family had left Russia, and she'd come to Glasgow as a teenager. But you always see someone as an old person. And then, I don't know, maybe I was looking at some photos, and I thought, I wonder what she was like when she was young. In fact, when she was a young girl, and when she was a young adult. And so, I just had this idea that we should look at old people as just being old. There's more to them than that. And now that I'm very old myself, I know that for a fact.
But it's interesting because I think you're a bit ahead of your time, because this issue of old people going into homes is really massive today. And you hear a lot about old people complaining about being put into homes against their will.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think also what was, it's very hard to get plays commissioned. It was then, and it still is. And I think Robert thought this was quite interesting, that a young person was writing about essentially old characters. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of younger characters in the play. It was only a half-hour play, but essentially the play becomes about 2 of the old ladies in the home. and one of them is quite sort of shy and retiring, and she had dreams when she was young of being an actress, as it happens. And Martha says, well, you know, you're never too young, you're never too old really to do anything you want really. And the other lady always thought she'd like to go to Hollywood and see what it's like. And Martha said, well, why don't we do it? And that leads to them escaping from the home. And sometimes when you write a play, it's the result of several things coming together. So I was quite obsessed by the movies and a program on television by Barry Norman, where he wrote about the movies and interviewed stars. Laker had just started Laker Skytrain, which offered cheaper flights to America. And so that all was in the mix.
And I mean, you probably found this quite amazing at the time, but it won a prestigious award in Chicago.
Yes, yeah, I didn't know anything about this to begin with, but Scottish Television had entered it for the Chicago Film and Television Awards, and it won a silver award. And the first thing I knew about it was when someone from the publicity department told me, and he said, "Congratulations, David." And I didn't know what he was congratulating me about. And I asked him, and he said, "Well, Martha's won an award in Chicago." And I said, "Oh, does that mean you're going to send me there to get it?" And he basically said something which I can't quite repeat here, but you know, jokingly he said, "Oh yeah, you'll be lucky." And then he went back to his office, and a few minutes later he phoned me up and he said, "Have you got a passport?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're going to America. You're coming to Edinburgh tomorrow with me to go to the American consul to get a visa, and you're going to spend 4 days in America. You're going to go to Chicago to pick up the award along with the director of the play, and you're also going to go to New York and represent STV at a BAFTA reception." So that was quite mind-blowing. It, you know, I'd never been, you know, I had actually been to America, but not for a weekend. That wasn't quite my style.
And the second play that you submitted was called The Audition.
Yes.
And I know that also won an award in Chicago, but I'll come back to that. The Audition, I think, from speaking to you, is probably the first time and maybe the only time that you sort of introduced your Jewish background into your writing.
Let me think. Possibly. I mean, I've written about all sorts of things, and when I've had an idea for something that is to do with Judaism, then I've gone for it. And the audition was as Jewish as you get. It was about a Glasgow shul, synagogue, auditioning for a new rabbi, and I'd met I've met quite a few rabbis, but I also met some priests and vicars, and I don't know, I began to see them as real people rather than just, you know, the religion that they represented. And I realized that in quite a lot of religions, there's a process when they choose a new rabbi or priest or vicar, where the candidates need to come and be interviewed by the board and maybe also meet the congregation. And so that's where that idea came from.
And what kind of research did you do for that? I mean, did you go to a shul? Did you take STV into a shul to film?
Well, actually, when I was writing the play, I had belonged to a small shul called Cross Hill, and the rabbi had been there for a long time, and sadly he passed away. And then a new young rabbi came, and I happened to get speaking to him, and that kind of inspired the play as well, because it was his first time in Glasgow, and I got the impression that it was quite a lonely thing, coming to a new town and being the leader of a community. But so I spoke to him a few times. I did some other research because I wanted to get the religious aspects of it absolutely right. But then once it was commissioned and it was going into production, Tina Wakerow, the director, wanted to make sure that they got everything right, and the designer as well wanted to know what a synagogue looked like. And she asked me to introduce her to a rabbi who would be a religious advisor for the play, and eventually she got in touch with Rabbi Jesna, who was the rabbi at Queen's Park, and he was very helpful. And what happened was quite a number of the production team started going to services to see what they were like, you know, and they would go to midweek services. And sometimes during the week, I'd get a phone call from Tina to say, David, we're all going to the synagogue on Wednesday night. Can you come? And I say, well, I don't normally go in the evening, but yeah, okay, I'll come. So, so that was very good, you know, and they built an amazing set in STV Studios, and some people from Queen's Park were employed as extras, including Rabbi Jesna. Well, Rabbi Jesna was going to be there anyway to advise, and the Chazan from Queen's Park, Reverend Zermai, was also cast in the play as the Chazan in the play, because we had to recreate the Shabbos morning service. So it was very interesting.
And as I mentioned earlier, that also won the Chicago Award, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Amazing.
So did you go back to Chicago to accept that as well?
No, I was old news by then, Colin. No.
What were you, 22 or something at the time? Or?
Yeah. No. I didn't go to Chicago, but STV, you know, did get get a lot of press, and I got photographed. I got photographed on the roof of STV holding the 2 awards.
Very nice.
That was for the Glasgow Herald.
That was a sort of an interesting interlude into Judaism with your work. But yeah. Judaism, was that quite important in your parents' home as you grew up?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we were regular shul attenders, and I was brought up in a house that was kosher, and yeah, it was very important to us, and it still is.
And your own family, are they following in your sort of religious footsteps, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. My 2 daughters, are very involved in their Judaism as well. In fact, my elder daughter, by 11 minutes, I have twins, you see, she's training to be a rabbi.
Excellent. So by this time you're kind of quite well established, but I want to go back a wee bit to the earlier part of your career. And at this point in your career, you were working more as a freelance. You didn't actually have a kind of a contract with anybody. So basically, I think you, as a freelance, and I've done that myself, you're kind of forced to accept anything which comes your way, any job offer that comes your way. And so I was just wondering what kind of projects you actually took on at that time.
Well, yes, as a freelance actor, writer, and director, you're always looking for new projects. You're looking out for adverts for different jobs. So I would look in the Guardian on a Monday because they had a big media section, and I'd get the Stage and Television Today on a Thursday and look at adverts there. And for 5 years after I left college, I ran a small-scale theatre company that toured 2 or 3 times a year. And when I wasn't doing that, I was just looking for other work, whether it be writing or performing. So I worked with some other theatre companies. After writing these 2 plays for STV, I wrote for Take the High Road, another soap for Southern Television, and also some schools programs, both for BBC and STV. And then I got to write for radio. Radio Scotland were starting a new daily drama series called Kilbrec, and I was one of the first writers on that project. There were 3 writers, and we each had to write, you know, a week at a time. So I worked on that for a year. And obviously I wasn't writing all the time, but I was contracted to write 55 episodes over a year, as well as doing my other work. And so that was really interesting. That was a real case of you had to deliver on time. You couldn't hang about waiting for inspiration or anything like that. You had to hit the typewriter running.
What were you doing at Southern TV, and how did that impact on your kind of, you know, because you were based up here, weren't you? And did you have to go down to wherever that was at Southampton? Is it they came from?
Yes. What happened was that Brian Islert, who'd been at STV as head of entertainment, moved to Southern Television, and he was involved in this series. And because he'd known me from Take the High Road, he suggested that I should write a couple of episodes for that series. So Southern Television would, you know, I'd have to go down to Southampton for script meetings and things like that. Because even though I was only writing 2 episodes, you had to be kind of across the whole series and work with the other writers as well. So they would fly me down to Southampton, which sounded very grand. But it also coincided with me directing a Christmas show for a theatre company in Aberdeen, and I was living in Aberdeen. But in Aberdeen, you know, this was another small-scale theatre company, a bit like my own. They had a fairly battered old van, and we rehearsed in a rather cold rehearsal room. But it was very good, very enjoyable, very nice people. But every so often, they would drive me to the airport so as I could fly to Southampton, be put up in some fancy hotel, and attend a one-day script meeting or something, and then catch the next flight home or back to Aberdeen. So that was my life. Life is, you know, when you're freelance, you get all kinds of different jobs, and it goes up and down. Just because you write for television a few times doesn't mean to say that you're going to do that always. You know, it's not. You know, you don't just suddenly do that all the time.
Was it a precarious existence at times?
At times, like anything freelance, you know, if you're a freelance builder or anything like that, sometimes you get a glut of work, and other times it can be thin on ground. But the good thing, because I, you know, also wanted to be a writer, I would be thinking up ideas when I didn't have any paid work. So I'd be writing and then sending off ideas, and then hoping you get commission or you get any work. Or sometimes I'd be writing a new theatre show that I would then direct and produce and perform in.
And of course, you continue to win prizes, and in particular, there was a prize for a script called Exile, and this was at the Edinburgh Fringe. And I'm just going to read some of the reviews for that, because, I mean, it's a long time ago now, but the reviews were phenomenal, really. So this is what it said in some of the papers at the time. Exile by David Ian Neville, produced at Edinburgh Fringe and Bush Theatre, London. Scotland Fringe First Award, Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Beautifully structured, lucidly written, from the Scotsman. Writing of the highest order, from the Herald. Writing that is jagged, simple, direct, and very moving, from the Observer.
So Exile was actually one of these things that I started writing when I was writing other things. Sometimes what happens is, you know, when you're a commissioned writer, when you're commissioned to write, I used to write a lot of schools programs for BBC Radio, and you know, I have quite a tight deadline, but sometimes, you know, first thing in the morning, it's difficult to get right into whatever you're going to write. So I sometimes would do a little exercise. I'd say to myself, for the first half hour, I can write whatever I want. doesn't need to be the thing that I'm going to work on. It could be a poem, it could be a monologue, it could be anything really, just to kind of warm up your mind and your writing muscles. And so one morning I started writing this play, and the first line was this lady saying, I knew something was going to happen. And I just started writing that, and that eventually grew into Exile. And just to explain to everyone that's listening, Exile is a series of 3 monologues about 3 characters whose lives have been affected by terrorism. The first person is the widow, not the widow, the wife of a British soldier who has been badly injured in a bomb explosion in Northern Ireland. And their marriage has broken up because he's so disabled that he didn't feel that he could be part of the marriage anymore. So he's returned to Glasgow and is living with his widowed father. So the first play is, his wife. The second play is this young lad's father, who's now looking after him. And the third play, the longest monologue, is a character called Sandra. And Sandra is the girlfriend of the guy that designed and made the bomb that exploded. And for one reason or another, she's walked out on him and is now living in London in a secret location because she's talked to the security services. She's fed up with the violence.
You did have a bit of a fascination with Northern Ireland at that point.
Yeah. Well, I studied Ireland, Northern Ireland at school, in history, and I was always interested in it. And then I read a series of books called they're sort of known as the Kevin and Sadie series, and they're written by Joan Lingard. The first book's called The 12th Day of July, and the second is Across the Barricades. And I was lucky enough to get to adapt both these books for theatre. I'd met Joan at various book events, and we got to know each other. And I said they would really make good plays for theatre. And very kindly she said, well, if you can get anyone interested, you can adapt one of them. So again, the life of a freelance writer is, going to see people. And there was a new director at the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow called Ian Brown, and he was running their young people's company, which toured schools and theatres. And Ian was wanting to meet as many writers as possible because he was new in the job. And he called me in and we had a chat. And he said, well, look, if you've got any ideas for us, get in touch. And I said, well, actually, as it happens, in my bag, I have this novel called The 12th Day of July, which is about a Protestant girl and a Catholic boy in Belfast. And I think it'd be a great show to tour schools. Well, Ian commissioned me to write that and tag toured it around secondary schools in Scotland. And then the next year he commissioned me to write an adaptation of Across the Barricades, which also toured schools in Scotland. So,
and when you met Joan after doing all this work, I think she was quite impressed, wasn't she?
Yes, yeah. I mean, when I was writing 12th Day of July, we had a couple of meetings, and I showed her a draft of the script, and she's a very experienced writer. She had written plays in the past, although now she was concentrating on her novels. And she liked what I did. And then when she came out to see the show on tour, she really enjoyed it. And to the extent that she said, when you adapt Across the Barricades, you can be even freer with it if you want, as long as you maintain the balance of the story. So that's what happened. And when she came to see Across the Barricades, she was very pleased with that. And And in years to follow, there were one or two other requests for dramatizations of Across the Barricades, in particular for radio, and for another theatre that wanted a longer version. And initially they went to Joan and asked Joan if she would do these adaptations. And Joan was concentrating on her novels at the time. So she said, no, please ask David Neville. He's the person that I think you should get to do this. So I ended up doing quite a few different adaptations of Across the Barricades.
So your freelance career was doing okay, but then you joined the BBC, where you spent the next 25 years.
Yes.
So I know you did lots of different things at the BBC, but I just wondered how that was structured. Were you taken on for a specific set of programs at the time, or were you part of a talent pool who could turn their hands to anything that needed done?
Well, I was freelance for 20 years, and during that time, I wrote quite a few things for the BBC, particularly for schools programs, and also made some short features. And then I applied for a job as a producer on a little-known radio program called The Archers, and I got the job. So I was a producer and director on The Archers, and that involved storylining, script editing, plus directing the actors in the studio. And after 3.5 years with The Archers, I then went to BBC Wales to help set up a new daily drama series, where again I was a producer and director. In fact, I ran the show on a day-to-day basis, working to an executive producer called Foz Allen. And after about a year and a half in Wales, I then got the opportunity to come back to Scotland and work for BBC Scotland. And I did that. I think I quite fancied bringing the family back to Scotland to have more time with my parents, and also to, my children were quite young, they were at primary school. And so I just saw it as quite a nice opportunity to come back to Scotland. And so, although I was working for BBC Scotland radio drama, most of the programmes we made were for Radio 4 and Radio 3 nationally, although I did make some programmes for Radio Scotland as well. And they were all drama programmes. I made a few drama documentaries, but mainly it was drama programmes, and that would be single plays and series.
When you came back to Scotland, where did you settle?
Well, for a year, we settled in Glasgow, even though my office was in Edinburgh. But then after a year, we moved to Edinburgh because of my wife's work. And so we lived in Edinburgh. And for a few years, my office was in Edinburgh. My wife's job was in Edinburgh. And then my office moved to Queen Margaret Drive in Glasgow. And I began commuting on a daily basis back and forward. Because one thing we haven't touched on is that, being freelance, you have to travel a lot sometimes. And certainly my freelance life, I did a lot of traveling, particularly when you're touring in theatre and things.
So I have to ask you this. We had a chat the other day, and I didn't ask this question at the time, but I'm going to ask it now. With that, the first day you walked into the BBC in London, were you overawed?
Well, the first time I did that was actually before I started working for the Archers, because a few years ago I had a short-term contract in their education department, the schools department, which was across from Broadcasting House. And it was a funny thing happened, because I applied for the job and got the job, got the short-term contract, and it's all very official. They say, come on this day and report to personnel officer such and such in one of their buildings. The BBC in central London at that time, round about near Oxford Circus, had, they must have had about 10 different buildings, and it could be quite confusing. So I had to find the particular building that HR were in. And I arrived there and asked for this person, and I was told this person was on holiday and wouldn't be back for a week. And I said, but I'm here to to start work. So it's all very confusing. But eventually they told me what to do, and they told me which building I had to go to, which was another building. And they were quite surprised because they'd forgotten I was starting that day as well. So the BBC, very organised organisation. Please don't get the impression that the BBC ever gets anything wrong.
Going back to your I suppose your childhood or your teen years, I mean, were your parents supportive of your ambitions, your career ambitions when you were a teenager?
Yes, I mean, I started going to an after-school drama workshop in the Citizens Theatre when I was about 15. And, my parents were very happy that I was doing that because they knew since I was about 5, I'd been interested in the theatre because they used to take me to the pantomimes and all the different shows. By the time I got to 17, I was applying, I wasn't really sure how you could get into theatre. It didn't really seem like a possibility. So I was applying to university and college to do business studies, but I also applied to drama college to do drama. And I got an offer for a university place and a college place, but I also eventually got offered a place at a drama college in Edinburgh and decided to do that. And, my parents were supportive of that. I think my mum, held out the hope that I would become a drama teacher. Although I took my qualification as a drama teacher, which I had to do because small-scale theatre companies that toured schools required the actors to also be trained teachers. So that's why I did my teaching qualification. And I said to you the other day, Colin, that for a good few years, although I was relatively busy working, if my mum saw an advert in the Glasgow Herald or any paper for a teaching job, she would cut it out and send it to me, which was interesting.
Did she ever come around one day and think, oh well, the boy done good?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And while you were at drama college, I think you got quite a lot of experience at some very prestigious places in Edinburgh.
Well, actually, my very first job was at the end of my first year at drama college. The Royal Lyceum Theatre were doing a production called The Three Estates, which is a big sort of epic Scottish play, a sort of medieval type play. And they were doing it at the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. It was a huge production with about, a cast of about 50 actors and singers. And they had to have extras in the production, peasants and soldiers. And the peasants had to sit on the steps of the stage at the front of the stage all through the production and occasionally go onto the stage and take part in scenes. And so the assistant director at the Lyceum at that time, Kenny Ireland, came to our drama college and enlisted several drama students to take part in that. And it was being directed by Bill Dryden, who was the associate director at the Lyceum at the time, and very much, a really strong up-and-coming director. And the cast was the cast of, the top actors in Scotland, people like Fulton Mackay, Ricky Fulton, Walter Carr, all sorts of people, Roddy McMillan, Edith MacArthur. So, I and other students were in rehearsals all the time, watching these people work. And then for 3 weeks when the show was on, we were watching it. I sat on the steps through every performance, and it was great because you got to watch really good actors at work and learn.
And you also got some work sort of behind the scenes as well at the Lyceum, didn't you?
Yes, that was another time. Both when I was at college, and particularly when I was in the years after leaving college, as well as doing writing work or acting work or directing or whatever. I'd also occasionally work on stage crews. And one festival, I worked at the Lyceum on the stage crew for about 3 weeks. And you had all sorts of different shows coming in, and they would come in, um, like for 2 or 3 days, sometimes a bit longer. And then what would happen is after they'd finished their last show, the stage crew would need to work through the night, striking the set and loading it into trucks, and then have a few hours sleep, and then come back to bring in the next show. So it was, it was good. It was good fun, hard work, but good fun. And if you did an overnight get out, as they were called, you got some extra money, which was very handy. But
It
also,
was a good.
sorry, I was just going to say, but also, the range of shows was terrific. I worked on a show called Pal Joey, and there's Fenella Fielding, I think, did a late night show, and the Banroku Theatre of Japan came for a few days to do a show with life-size puppets. So it was incredible to watch.
Great apprenticeship, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Set you up. I think we've pretty well covered your working life, and I think maybe now would be a good time, Janet, if you agree to open this up to any other questions.
I think what we wanted to do first of all was, David, were you going to show any clips of?
Oh yeah.
We've had a request as well, so.
I think you might all remember a thing called COVID. Well, in 2019, COVID virtually shut down the entertainment industry. And at the time, I was working on a play that I was going to direct for a play of Pie in a Pint at Glasgow's Lunchtime Theatre. But they also had to close. But one of their directors came up with the idea that they could do some very short plays online, like 5-minute plays called pint-sized plays. And I ended up directing 4 of them and writing 2 of them. And what I'm going to show you now, if I can get the technology to work, is one play that I wrote and directed. And I should tell you that to direct them, I had to record direct the actors over Zoom, direct the actor over Zoom, and then they had to self-shoot on their mobile phone, and then I would edit that and produce the finished piece. So this is a play called Nadia's Day, and it's about a woman who's just moved flats, albeit during the lockdown. So I'll let it speak for itself. It lasts for about 5 minutes.
I love it. All this. It's my place. My space. I never thought I would, but it's wrapped me up like a huge comfort blanket. They can't get to me. And do you know what? I might stay like this forever. I'll never go out again. As long as I can get my home deliveries and that cheeky guy with the dreadlocks rings my bell every Friday, then I'm made. Although, to be honest, sometimes it's Steve, and he's a bit moody. He's got issues. I didn't want to move. They said it was best. Jack doesn't need to know. But there's no buts, Nadia. Close that door. It doesn't make you happy. Because of lockdown, it had to be quick. here I am. Anyway, Marley, that's the guy with the dreadlocks. It's not Bob, obviously. Although he does look a wee bit like Bob Marley. That's why I go. He has always got a cheery disposition. Always says something nice, something positive. Like even when it's bucketing down. At the start of lockdown, I had over-ordered and I had these 3 boxes and it was literally raining cats and dogs. And he brought up the first box and left it outside my door. He says, I've got a few more boxes in the van, love. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, no worries. I need the exercise. It's the exercise. He has got muscles like Tyson Fury, and you don't get them from playing the guitar. Not that I know that he plays the guitar. It's just the whole, the Bob Marley thing. He plays the... Sorry. So he brings up the other box and it's overfilled with this multi-pack of extra soft loo rolls and it rolls down the steps and I am so embarrassed. You don't want people seeing you buying loo roll. I says, excuse me, thanks, and he picks up the loo roll and puts it back on top of the box. And I'm like, I didn't buy, I only ordered a 4-pack. And he says, no worries, enjoy. Enjoy? No offence, it's just my wee joke, lady. I wasn't taking offence, but did you hear that? He called me a lady. Lady. He just says, take care of yourself, love, and then he just got back in his van and he just drove away. When we were together, me and Jack, laughter was not his default position. I irritated him. I know I did. No. Still think about phoning him. Still got his number in my phone. He's not got mine. Not this new one. He would not be pleased about that. Just put that aside, Nadia. Put that aside and move on. Move on. On with the day. My day.
There we are. So that was Nadia.
I think that's the end of the formal part of the evening. So thank you very much to David and Colin for an excellent session.